The Duchess of Windsor, otherwise known as Wallis Simpson. She was highly requested. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. This woman was not well liked at all. And there is so much negative information about her. Consider this my capsule collection of tea about Wallis. For those that might need a refresher, Wallis Simpson was married to Prince Edward, the Duke of Windsor. What's the big deal? Well, it changed the course of the British monarchy and it changed history. Edward was the eldest son of King George V. King George V and Queen Mary had 6 children total. And because Edward was the oldest, he was next in line for succession. So when his father passed away, he became King Edward VIII, but then he gave it all up. His little brother, Prince Albert, stepped up. He became King George VI. His daughter became Queen Elizabeth II. So now we have her son, King Charles. Eventually, William will be king and Catherine will be queen. If Edward didn't marry Wallis, we wouldn't have had Princess Diana, and nobody would have cared who Prince Harry married. So who was Wallis Simpson? Well, she was just an ordinary broad from America. She was married 2 times. She wasn't traditionally beautiful, but they say she was a freak in the sheets. Bessie Wallace Warfield was born on June 19th, 1896 in Pennsylvania. She was named after her father, Teakle Wallace Warfield, and her mother was Alice Montague. But when they got married, she was already knocked up, so this was like a huge scandal. Her father passed away when she was just a baby, so Bessie and her mother were supported by her father's family. Her uncle, Solomon Warfield, would give them an allowance. So yes, they weren't out on the street, but they weren't really in the elite. Bessie grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. She attended one of the best finishing schools with the intent of marrying a high society man. And at some point, she dropped the name Bessie and went by Wallis. When she was 20, Wallis went to Florida for vacation, where she met a guy, Earl Winfield Spencer Jr. They called him Win. He was a Navy pilot. They got married in 1916, but Win, he drank a lot and he was very abusive to Wallis, and they would split up and get back together. They were stationed here and there, and then they lived in China for a moment where allegedly she had affairs and learned special techniques in bed. By 1925, they were living apart and they finally got divorced in 1927. And she met this guy, Ernest Simpson. He was wealthy. Was she in love? Nope. She loved his money. And was he married? Yep. But what does that matter? He divorced his wife to marry Wallis in 1928. Wallis Simpson is loving her new life. They moved to London. She's throwing lavish parties. People are like, girl, you are the hostess with the mostest. Then she meets Thelma Furness, or Telma. You might remember that Telma was identical twins with Gloria Vanderbilt, who had Gloria Vanderbilt, so she was Anderson Cooper's grandma. Telma was Prince Edward's mistress. Prince Edward is the most eligible bachelor. Thelma introduces Wallis and her husband to the prince, and they all become friends. Pretty soon, Edward and Wallis are bumping uglies, and now she is his mistress. Wallis is loving her new role as the prince's mistress. I mean, yeah, she's married, she's had affairs, but she's having the time of her life, okay? But Edward is sprung like a spring chicken. This man cannot get enough of Wallis, okay? Her sweet yams must be extra sweet because he's professing his love to her and she's just having fun being the side chick, and it's getting really serious. At this point, everyone knows about the affair, including her husband Ernest, and he's like, okay, so he moves on with this woman, Mary Raffray. Now get this, Mary and Wallis were childhood friends. It's so messy. By now, Edward is the king, and he is telling everyone he is in love with Wallis Simpson and he's going to marry her. But the problem is she's a divorcee. I mean, divorced twice? That was a huge deal back then. So what does this man do? He abdicates the throne. He gives it up. He's like, I cannot be king if Wallis is not by my side. I mean, he was king for less than a year. 6 months after he abdicates, he and Wallis get married, and no one from the royal family attends. This is a huge deal, okay? And now his little brother is king, and he gives Edward the title of Duke of Windsor, and he gets to keep his HRH title, which basically means His Royal Highness. But they shade Wallis. I mean, sure, she can be Duchess of Windsor, but she cannot be an HRH, so she's not Her Royal Highness. And Edward is annoyed. They give him an allowance and they send these two off to France. They're exiled. They're living in a French chateau. Edward is lavishing her with jewels, emerald engagement ring. This woman's jewelry collection was impressive. Remember, these two caused a scandal by this whole situation, okay? Everyone's like, WTF. And then these losers make the decision to go visit Yahtzees and shake hands with the man with the mustache. Can you imagine the controversy this caused? So the royal family sends him to the Bahamas and says, you know what, go away, you're now governor. For the rest of their lives, Edward and Wallis just become socialites. They had a life of leisure, okay? They're having lavish parties, they're guests of honor, they're traveling to America. At one point, Queen Elizabeth visits France and they meet up. I mean, talk about awkward. I just feel like Prince Philip is giving her the side eye. There were all of these rumors about the couple, right? That she was a dominatrix and he was kind of a wuss. But America liked them. Of course we did. They would meet with politicians and socialites always wanted to be around them. There was one in particular, Jimmy Donahue, who was a Woolworth heir. He was actually cousins with Barbara Hutton. Jimmy was a menace. He was a partier, he was a troublemaker, and he was openly gay. He was always doing outlandish things, and apparently he put these paper crowns on the couple at a New Year's Eve party. If you look up Jimmy Donahue and the Windsors, you're going to see all types of rumors, like Edward was in love with him, or Jimmy was sleeping with Wallis. Maybe they all slept together. I don't know, with some freaky stuff. But throughout it all, these two stayed together. They were married for 35 years. In 1972, at the age of 77, Edward passed away from cancer. Wallis was allowed to stay at Buckingham Palace for the funeral. Here she is with Queen Elizabeth. After Edward passed away, Wallis basically became a recluse. She stayed to herself. She became frail, she had dementia. She survived for 14 more years, and in 1986, at the age of 89, Wallis Simpson passed away from pneumonia. Queen Elizabeth attended her funeral, and she was buried next to Edward on the grounds of Windsor Castle. Fun fact, they are buried near Frogmore Cottage, where Prince Harry and Meghan lived. This concludes the tea on Wallis Simpson. I'm sorry, I just had to. Count Dracula, same vibes, same hair, same color.